Hello everyone. In this lecture, let's talk about fishes. The story of vertebrate evolution started in the ancient seas of the Cambrian period. Figure 1 shows the key vertebrate characteristics that evolved subsequently. Wriggling through the water, jawless and toothless, the first fishes sucked up small food particles from the ocean floor like miniature vacuum cleaners. Most were less than a foot long, respired with gills, and had no paired fins or vertebrae. They did have a head and a primitive tail to push them through the water. For 50 million years, during the Ordovician period, these simple fishes were the only vertebrates. By the end of this period, fish had developed primitive fins to help them swim and massive shields of bone for protection. Jawed fishes first appeared during the Silurian period, and along with them came a new mode of feeding. Typically, the fish body is a blind, streamlined, spindle-shaped, tapering tailward and slightly flattened laterally. It is an ideal design for active swimming, the tail being the main swimming organ. The fins, which can pivot, control stability and direction of movement. Paired fins act as falls to control pitch and act as brakes. Unpaired fins act as stabilizers. All fishes have important characteristics in common. First, fish have an internal skeleton with a bony or cartilaginous spine surrounding the dorsal nerve cord, and a bony or cartilaginous skull encasing the brain. Exceptions are the jawless hagfish and lampreys. In hagfish, a cartilaginous skull is present, but vertebrae are not. The notochord persists and provides support. In lampreys, a cartilaginous skeleton and notochord present, but rudimentary cartilaginous vertebrae also surround the notochord in places. Second, fishes other than lampreys and hagfish all have jaws and paired appendages, features that are also seen in tetrapods. Jaws allowed these fish to capture larger and more active prey. Most fishes have two pairs of fins, a pair of pectoral fins at the shoulder and a pair of pelvic fins at the hip. In the lobe-finned fish, these pairs of fins became jointed. Third, fishes are water-dwelling creatures and must extract oxygen dissolved in the water around them. They do this by directing a flow of water through their mouths and across their gills. The gills are composed of fine filaments of tissue that are rich in blood vessels. Fourth, blood is pumped from the heart to the gills. From the gills, the oxygenated blood passes to the rest of the body and then returns to the heart. The heart is a muscular tube pump made of two chambers that contract in sequence. Fifth, fishes are unable to synthesize phenylalanine, tryptophan, and tyrosine, so they must consume them in their foods. This inability has been inherited by all their vertebrate descendants. Agnathans include the simplest fish, which have no jaws and typically lack paired fins. They have many paired gill openings. They are represented today by only a few species, including the lamprey and the hagfish, with a skeleton of cartilage and naked of scales. Extinct forms, referred to broadly as ostracoderms, were mostly heavily armored forms encased by a box-like carapace of thick, bony plates and scales. The endoskeleton, or cartilage, is not usually preserved. They were bottom-living forms, generally lacking paired appendages and rather like tadpoles in shape, probably swimming in a similar way by undulating the tail. They became extinct at the end of the Devonian. Cephalaspis is one of the best-known ostracoderms. The head region is covered by a rigid, bony shield, and the rest of the body by elongated scales. It has, unlike most ostracoderms, a pair of fins lying just behind the head shield. The depressed shape of the head shield, with eyes close together on top, is typical of a bottom-dwelling fish. The position of the mouth on the underside, with paired gill slits ranged behind it, is shown in Figure 2. Cephalaspis is thought to have lived in freshwater pools or streams, feeding on organic matter filtered in the gill pouches from the sediment on the stream bed. The development of jaws in fish was a notable event in vertebrate evolution. Together with paired limbs and lungs, it widened the possibilities of water as an environment, and eventually led to the emergence on land of the tetrapods. The bones, which formed the jaws, originated, on embryological and other evidence, from a pair of jointed skeletal bars which supported an anterior set of gills. The development of jaws implies predatory habits and consequently a need for increased mobility. This was met by the development of fins, and these are of characteristic type in each of the 4 classes of fish with jaws. Armored fishes called placoderms and spiny fishes called acanthodians both had jaws. Spiny fishes were quite common during the early Devonian period, largely replacing ostracoderms, but they became extinct themselves at the close of the Permian. Like ostracoderms, they had internal skeletons made of cartilage, but their scales contained small plates of bone, foreshadowing the much larger role bone would play in the future of vertebrates. Spiny fishes were jawed predators and far better swimmers than ostracoderms, with as many as 7 fins to aid their swimming. All these fins were reinforced with strong spines, giving these fishes their name. Climatis is typical with paired fins ventrally and single, median, dorsal and anal fins. It has the fusiform body of an actively swimming predator. The axis of the tail is tilted upwards, overlying the tail fin. Head and body are covered with small, rhombic scales, and larger scales cover the gill openings. The eyes and mouth are large, and the jaws well furnished with sharp teeth. By the mid-Devonian period, the heavily armored placoderms became common. A truly diverse and successful group. 7 orders of placoderms dominated the seas of the late Devonian, only to become extinct at the end of that period. The placoderm jaw was much improved over the primitive jaw of spiny fishes, with the upper jaw fused to the skull and the skull hinged on the shoulder. Most were relatively small forms, but some reached 10 meters in length, with a skull that had an enormous bite. At the end of the Devonian period, essentially all these pioneer vertebrates disappeared, replaced by sharks and bony fishes in one of several mass extinctions that occurred during Earth's history. Sharks and bony fishes first evolved in the early Devonian, 400 million years ago. In these fishes, the jaw was improved even further, with the upper part of the first gill arch behind the jaws being transformed into a supporting strut or prop, joining the rear of the lower jaw to the rear of the skull. This allowed the mouth to open much wider than was previously possible. Their skin may be studied with tiny tooth-like scales, denticles. Like teeth, these are made of dentine covered with enamel. During the Carboniferous period, sharks became the dominant predators in the sea. Sharks, as well as skates and rays, have a skeleton made of cartilage, like primitive fishes, but it is calcified, strengthened by granules of calcium carbonate deposited in the outer layers of cartilage. The result is an exceptionally light and strong skeleton. Streamlined with paired fins and a light, flexible skeleton, sharks are superior swimmers. Their pectoral fins are particularly large, jutting out stiffly like airplane wings. And that is how they function, adding lift to compensate for the downward thrust of the tail fin. Sharks were among the first vertebrates to develop teeth. These teeth evolved from rough scales on the skin and are not set into the jaw, but rather sit atop it. They are not firmly anchored and are easily lost. In a shark's mouth, the teeth are arrayed in up to 20 rows. The teeth in front do the biting and cutting, and behind them other teeth row and wait their turn. When a tooth breaks or is worn down, a replacement from the next row moves forward. A single shark may eventually use more than 20,000 teeth in its lifetime. Many of the early evolutionary lines of sharks died out during the Great Extinction at the end of the Permian period. The survivors thrived and underwent a burst of diversification during the Mesozoic era, when most of the modern groups of sharks appeared. Skates and rays, which are dorsoventrally flattened relatives of sharks, evolved at this time, some 200 million years after the sharks first appeared. Osteichthyes, the bony fish, are distinguished by their bony skeleton and scales, and by the bony flap covering the gills. The skull is covered by a complex arrangement of plates, and the body by scales. Most possess an air bladder or, more primitively, lungs. The air bladder functions as a buoyancy control. It contains gas which is adjusted to vary the specific gravity of the body, so that the fish can maintain effortlessly its depth in the water. It arises during development as a sac-like outgrowth from the pharynx. In the ray-finned fish, the paired fins resemble a fan consisting of a web skin supported only by horny rays, and with skeletal bones lying inside the body. The fins are flexible foils used for braking as well as steering, and there is a single dorsal establishing fin. Most living members have an air bladder and typically breathe by gills, although lungs are present in two primitive, surviving forms and have been found as traces in some fossil forms. Holostenes occur in Mesozoic fresh and seawater deposits, and shell modifications connected with improved feeding and locomotion. By the later Cretaceous, the Holostenes in their turn, were largely replaced by the modern type of bony fish, the teleosts. In ray-finned fishes, the internal skeleton of the fin is composed of parallel bony rays that support and stiffen each fin. There are no muscles within the fins. Rather, the fins are moved by muscles within the body. By contrast, lobe-finned fishes have paired fins that consist of a long, fleshy muscular lobe, supported by a central core of bones that form fully articulated joints with one another. There are bony rays only at the tips of each lobed fin. Muscles within each lobe can move the fin rays independently of one another, a feat no ray-finned fish could match. Lobe-finned fishes evolved 390 million years ago, shortly after the first bony fishes appeared. Only 8 species survive today, 2 species of coelacanth and 6 species of lungfish. Although rare today, lobe-finned fishes played an important part in the evolution story of vertebrates. Amphibians almost certainly evolved from the lobe-finned fishes. Fishes are generally characterized by the possession of a vertebral column, jaws, paired appendages, a lateral line system, internal gills, and single-loop circulation. Cartilaginous fishes have lightweight skeletons and were among the first vertebrates to develop teeth. The very successful bony fishes have unique characteristics such as swim bladders and gill covers, as well as ossified skeletons. One type of bony fish, the lobe-finned fish, gave rise to the ancestors of amphibians. That is all for now. Thanks for watching. See you next time.